Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today. I'm Lewis Temple, the new CEO of the Impact Facility, and I'm really looking forward to working together with the Impact Facility team and all of our supporters and partners to continue to make a real difference for mining communities in East and Central Africa and beyond over the near and long-term future. I'm joined today by Assheton Stewart Carter, who co-founded the Impact Facility 6 years ago and has been the CEO of the Impact Facility throughout that period. Can you reflect a little bit on the founding of the Impact Facility and why you did it and those early days?
So I've been working for international development organisations for about 12 years, and I thought that we were missing a huge opportunity. So those international organisations only looked at mining and hydrocarbon extraction as a threat to people's rights or a threat to the ecology, to the rainforest, but didn't look at it as an opportunity. And when I looked at the mining communities or mineral communities huddled around mineral developments, I saw that there was a huge gap in serving these very underserved communities. So in Africa, mining is the second largest employer after agriculture and accounts for millions of people's livelihoods, but environmental organizations and donor organizations wouldn't approach it because they deemed it to be too risky. So we're missing this enormous opportunity in what is a highly intense, high wealth generating activity, but the benefits of that don't accrue locally. And what was missing then was an agency, an agent, an intermediary that could be in between the donor community, the downstream companies who are buying the minerals, and the community, and find the opportunities to invest in those. And there was no such organisation. So that was one thing. There's this massive opportunity. I thought it was a huge shame that this massive potential for these mining communities has been foregone for many decades. And the other thing I noticed working for 12 years in the organisations that I did is that the approach to development was something that had become a norm, I think, but really without any sort of self-reflection. And there are many organizations who invest in capacity development or technical training, but not very many who would, if they did look at mining communities at all, look at how you could actually build entrepreneurs and enterprises. So the idea of the Impact Facility was to provide that unique approach for a community that had been overlooked.
Reflecting back on the last 6 years, what are you most proud of? What do you think are the main achievements of the organisation in this period?
Yeah, well, we survived through COVID, so that's one main achievement, I think. But we've got a couple of really strong programs. One that you've just been visiting in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is the Fair Cobalt Alliance. Not only are we working with Congolese partners on the ground, which is not only right, but also helps build indigenous capacity on the ground, but also importantly that the alliance is the alliance of companies from the consumers of these minerals, of cobalt in this case, such as Tesla and Google and Fairphone, to the mining companies who work alongside these artisanal miners like Glencore and CMOC. And so you've got a collaboration of unlikely bedfellows, if you want, who are all pushing towards the same end. So I think that's incredibly important to bring that collective to development. Similarly, I'm very proud of the work that we're doing in investment in gold. So this is the first model where we've actually formalized the investment into small-scale mines in Uganda, Kenya, and now in Tanzania. And we have now a track record of repayment. So these miners who we've lent money to buy equipment are actually now repaying, and some are repaid in full. So this makes them a viable asset class, if you want. And we set this up so that it is, even though it's relatively small amounts of money compared to the capital flows into Africa. We set this up in a very formal way. So we have an investment committee. We record in investment memos how this works, just as if it were an investment size 100 times that it is. So I think that's a first as well. We always wanted to be a very innovative organization. There's no point trying to do what other large organizations do, being small and nimble. We can try new things, we can fail fast, and make models which are replicable and can be taken up by others. And one of those is responsible mineral credits, which we launched last year, and responsible cobalt credits, which is a little bit like a renewable energy credit or an offset. And this is, to me, potentially huge because it enables big and small companies in the supply chain who aren't able to have a direct relationship with mines, and so can't influence how mining is done, whether it's done responsibly, but can identify mines that we're working at. We can generate a credit, and they can buy credits commensurate with their consumption to reward those mines for working responsibly. So it's these sort of mechanisms we've got to keep on inventing, innovating, testing and scaling so that we can make this a much more inclusive club.
What sort of change have you seen over the 6 years that you've been working directly with miners and their communities?
Well, if I compare how I went down there 6 years ago and what I see now, I think the first thing you see is pride, and this is both in our operations in East Africa with the gold miners and also with the cooperatives organising the cobalt diggers in the DR Congo. They have a sense of pride that they are managing their sites in a way that they can see and experience is better than it was previously. And then I think the other one, which is really very clear on our targets, is that they have more money in their pockets for their families. A miner in one of these mines can earn at least 8 times more than a middle school teacher, for example. But if you can make that safer and they can get a predictable income, then I think we're beginning to achieve our aims. So I think it's that.
Yes, and I was very struck talking to the miners in the Congo about actually the quite good incomes that they're earning. I spoke to Philos in a mine near Kolwezi just last week, and he was earning over $1,000 a month, which is very much more than sort of working in teaching or another public service or even the private sector, and had bought a plot, was in the process of building a house, and he had big ambitions. He wanted a modern house, he wanted to look after his family, and that was really clear. Another miner I met in another mine site called Nazi, he has 13 children. Imagine that.
Yeah, a lot of loving.
Yeah, and was looking after all of those children, sending them to school, and also actually had a small farm at his homestead, and was able to pay local people to farm for him using the income that he had from mining.
But that's right. I mean, now it's the perception of mining. This mining generally is a sort of a no-go. You can see it in people's demeanour. And when they get into conversation with you, and they'll say, mining, that's the bad one, as though other sectors are the good ones. So that has been the most difficult thing. I was thinking, as I mentioned, I spent 12 years working in international development, and I guess I kind of come up with a few things of, if you really want to fail, here are some of the things that you need to do if you really want to fail in development. And one of those things is go it alone. As I mentioned earlier, development is not a single sector, but it involves NGOs, international agencies, but also big business, tech innovators, designers, and all the rest of it. We need to harness every part of our economy to think through how we can reduce the gap between essentially the rich and the poor, what we've got to now. Some large international organizations, in this world where we're told we have to productize to scale and be known, that they will come up with their solution, a toolbox, a product, and that will be sold as the thing. Now, that never works. You have to start with, throw all that out of the window before you start, find out what is going on the ground, and then maybe, just maybe, you have something in your toolbox that might be of help, but it's more likely you're going to have to co-develop that with the community. We all live in systems, whether those economic systems or whether they're value chains or supply chains. And if you look at just one part of that system and you try and change it, that is where you get unintended consequences. So I saw this when I was building the conflict minerals supply chain for tin. And they would focus on one issue, one country, and try and reduce the amount of small-scale tin miners. And of course, what happened is overnight, once the contracts were withdrawn, all those tin miners then down tools because they haven't got any social security, and they walked across the country and taking hunting in the national forests as they went through to find the gold in the east of the country, for example. At the Impact Facility, we look at mineral landscapes and try and understand how mineral fits into that. And you and I have been to a few conferences which included sessions on small-scale miners earlier this year. And at these conferences, you're actually hearing some more gloomy news about artisanal miners and how some of recent interventions haven't been successful. And the World Bank is coming out with a report a little bit later this summer, reflecting on 10 years of investing into or putting money aside for artisanal miners. So what are we doing differently to change that? I mean, it seems to me we have got this kernel of success here and this emergent model for how we can scale. Is it simply because we're taking a business approach to?
Yes, I think it is the business approach, but also we are working directly with these miners. We're not, we have business relationships with these miners directly. We're not working at a very high level with national organizations and governments and policy and so on, though our work is influencing policy. And I saw that directly in the Congo, where we've helped set up a new system for recognizing artisanal cobalt mining, which is really important for the future. But that's based upon practical work on the ground with the miners. We're there day in, day out, working with those artisanal miners to improve their livelihoods and their lives, and making miners safer and more productive and profitable for them. So for me, that's the key difference.
That's great. Well, it's great to have you on the helm with that vision. And now let's talk a little bit about that vision and turn to the future. We're in the middle of what everybody's calling the energy transition, or the green energy transition, which of course draws on different minerals and metals. In some ways, we're moving out of the oil age and into a new minerals age. What does this mean for the Impact Facility, if anything?
Oh, it's hugely important for the Impact Facility, and we're of course, big supporters of this drive to net zero and the green energy transition. But as you said, Assheton, these minerals such as cobalt, which forms a critical component of electric car batteries, for example, makes them far more productive and reliable. So these minerals are really important to drive that. And we're keen to see growing recycling of such minerals, but we have to face the reality that to drive this energy transition does need substantial increases of extraction of these minerals to support that process. And importantly, that those resources going back into the community to help the community to develop in these mineral-rich areas, so that they can drive the improvements in their lives, rather than those, the wealth being generated, being extracted from the country and extracted from those communities.
What do we have to do to convince these banks that these mines can be bankable?
We have just in the process of publishing a case study on our investing work in collaboration with a program called Planet Gold, which would encourage people watching and listening to to read, to learn more about our approach. Our strategy in the future will be two strands. One, continuing to scale our investment, and then sort of sharing the experience with others. Because as you said earlier, Assheton, it's, we can't just do this alone. We need to do this together with lots of other organizations and individuals and governments around the world to really have an impact at large scale in these countries to make a real difference. There's some 45 million artisanal miners working now, and all could benefit from this kind of support. So I'm strongly focused on scaling up what we're doing because it's working well.
So on that note, we have these anchor programs in the DR Congo, the Fair Cobalt Alliance, and with our gold miners in Tanzania and Kenya. You've just arrived back from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, visiting the mining communities where we work. There's some of these people who go down tens of meters underground to dig cobalt and gold out of the ground. Give us your first impressions of the Impact Facility and what you've just seen.
I think I'm astounded about the achievements of the Impact Facility over the last 6 years. It's grown rapidly, and I'd like to highlight three things that I'm most impressed of so far in the organisation. Firstly, the Fair Cobalt Alliance. Now, this convening of some of the largest and most significant companies in the world in the cobalt supply chain have been brought together by the Impact Facility, all focused on the same goal, which is to enable artisanal cobalt miners to benefit more from the resources that they have in their communities and to impact positively on their communities. Secondly, the artisanal gold program in Kenya and in Tanzania, which, as you said, I've just visited, and I had the exciting experience of actually going down 4 of the mines together with these artisanal miners in Kenya, which was an extraordinary experience, including I was up to my waist in water in the bottom of one of the gold mines. But this has been a really innovative approach of the Impact Facility. It's investing in these miners as businesses in an environment where they cannot access this sort of finance anywhere else. The banks won't touch them, and their only sources of finance is very expensive financiers in the community who take advantage of their situation. So for the first time, the Impact Facility is enabling them to access finance, to invest in their mines, particularly in the equipment they need to be able to develop their mines, increase their productivity, and importantly, increase employment in the mines as well. And one of the things that is most important, because these are quite dangerous environments to work in, is the focus that the Impact Facility has on health and safety support and helping them ensure that they have safe environments within which to work. But lastly, I really wanted to highlight the remarkable team. And I've had a great pleasure of meeting colleagues in Congo and in Kenya over the last few weeks. And I'm just astounded at the dedication, the commitment to the mission, and the drive of that these colleagues have. So you should be very proud of the team you've built there, Assheton.
Thanks, Lewis. And it's great to hear you've had such a positive experience in your first weeks. And I want to come back to the Fair Cobalt Alliance and some of the work we're doing in gold investing, if we can, a little bit later. Yeah. But before I do that, let's pan out a little bit. I think I started in development in my first job in a development organization, 1999. So that's about 25 years, but you've been at it even longer than I have, which is difficult to believe given your youthful appearance and energy, Lewis. But what has changed in the international development world in the last 30 years? What have you learnt or want to unlearn, and how are you bringing that experience to the Impact Facility?
I think if you look at the sort of the course of my career over the last also just slightly more than 25 years, I've had a strong focus on different initiatives which can impact at scale, not just in one or two communities, but actually have national or international impact. So early on, I worked with governments in the countries of the former Soviet Union to transform and reform their child welfare systems, and later working with NGOs. But one of the key themes that I've had in my career is working at the intersection of business and social impact.
No, it's good to hear you say that. That's exactly why we founded the Impact Facility, for that reason, to drive these small-scale businesses, enable them to be viable and profitable. It reminds me a little bit of, was it in 2009 or 2012 that book called Dead Aid came out? And roughly about the same time, the Washington Post wrote a series of articles about large international agencies pointing to the seven-figure salaries of the CEOs that they were that were leading those organizations. And really the key messages were there's a lot of waste in the organizations, and two, we're not spending the money in the right way. Have we learned our lesson, and is the Impact Facility headed in the right direction? I hope you're going to say yes, but let's hear what your response is to that.
I think the Impact Facility has really made a very good case for investing in artisanal mining. And one of the things which has really struck me, actually, since I've been engaging in this sector over the last few days, has been how marginal it is in the mainstream international development discussion, debates and investments, even though it's a tremendously important part of the economy of many countries in Africa, Asia and Latin America. It's the second biggest economic sector in Africa after agriculture. And yet it's ignored by mainstream international development agencies. So that'd be one of my missions at the Impact Facility, is really to bring the focus on artisanal mining and the wider mining sector into the mainstream of development thinking. And with a new government in this country, hopefully we can have some influence here as well with a new and refreshed approach to international development. But I think that the Impact Facility is, in response to your question about are we taking the right approach, I firmly believe that we are. For example, our investment in artisanal miners is exactly the right approach, rather than a charitable approach of giving things away. In my experience, if you give something away, anyone will take it. Of course they will. It's a freebie. Will they use it? Will they value it? Will they really commit to changing their lives with that? But if the sort of investment approach is a very much more respectful approach, as I said earlier, which builds upon their capacity and the resources they have in their community, and they're investing themselves. They're co-investing. So they've got to believe in their business. They've got to be committed. But now we've got to take it to scale. So we demonstrated it, and that would be my big focus now, is how do we get that from the scale it is at the moment to working with hundreds or thousands of artisanal miners.
So there's a couple of points I picked up on there. One is you mentioned that mining is seen to be too risky, and the other one is about the narrative around this. I've heard a lot just this year. I've been speaking at a few conferences earlier this year, and the word everybody likes to use is de-risking, that we got to de-risk for investors to get in place. But this is development, this is inherently risky. That's why we're doing the work we're doing. And I guess that comes to the narrative. How do we change the narrative to attract what I would think of as risk-tolerant patient capital into the parts of the world that need it the most?
No, exactly. And I think we're doing that, actually. And the investment approach in Kenya and Tanzania is exactly demonstrating that artisanal gold miners are investable. They can, return. These are profitable businesses, and there's great potential for international development investors to invest in this area. And so I think from the work that the Impact Facility is doing, we are de-risking it for the larger scale, the governmental, the investors and the private investors of, the impact, so-called impact investment community is growing massively over the last few years. So there's a lot of interest in this area of so-called impact investment, but as far as I can see, a lack of projects or investable businesses for them to focus on. So we would love to speak to other investors and social investors who are interested in this area, because it can achieve great business impact, but also social impact, given that these mines are located in some very rural areas with limited alternative livelihoods. I was very aware in Kenya and in the DRC in my recent visit of the impact of climate change on these communities, which is going to make agriculture and small-scale farming far more difficult for those communities. So mining is a real alternative for them. But it's risky, it's dangerous for the miners, and they need organisations like the Impact Facility to help them develop their businesses in a way that's safe for the miners and also the community.
So I said I wanted to come back to the Fair Cobalt Alliance and the work that the Impact Facility is doing with gold miners in Kenya and Tanzania. Tell us a little bit about your reflections.
Yeah, it was a tremendous visit and hugely insightful for me, because this is actually the first time I've been engaging directly with artisanal miners. So I was particularly impressed with one of our clients who's called Brian, who was... He'd taken the Impact Facility investment and bought a compressor, but was also investing himself with a new gold treatment process as well. Had also invested in a new type of alternative to using mercury as well, because that was safer for himself and the community, but also would deliver greater benefits because he's able to extract more gold from the ore that he was mining than using mercury. So I was hugely impressed with those miners in Kenya that I met.
And you say that we have good prospects, which indeed I believe we have, but we've also got now a little bit of a track record to show that these miners are in fact paying back their loans. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. We do have a track record, and in fact we've also engaged in partnership with new impact investors as well to scale our program, particularly in Tanzania now, based upon the work that we've done in Kenya, because these miners have paid back and are going on to the next cycle. Actually, they are moving on to a new piece of equipment that they need to develop their mine even further. So one of the mines is on the third round of investment from the Impact Facility. So really clearly demonstrating that these are investable.
What's next?
Great question, Assheton. There's a lot of other countries in Africa and elsewhere that also have large communities of artisanal miners. I think that we can take our experience in those countries and take them to other countries, as well as scaling up what we're doing in the existing in those existing countries. So. But we don't necessarily need to do that ourselves. We can also share our knowledge, our experience, our practical work, and also enable the miners to speak for themselves as well. We took an artisanal miner, Lawrence, to a big conference in Paris a couple of months ago. And his words had far more impact than anyone else in the room, because he was doing it himself. He was investing himself. He was delivering gold into the market himself, not like everybody else in the room who were, policy people and working in big companies and so on. So, I think it's about spreading the word as well as driving impact through our own work and scaling that up into new countries. So I think there's great potential around the world for the Impact Facility, doing it ourselves and sharing our knowledge as well. Thank you, Assheton, for joining me in this conversation today. I'm very much looking forward to working with you going forward and seeing the Impact Facility grow over the next 6 years and indeed far beyond. And thank you everyone for listening to us today. Please do get in touch if you have any questions, and indeed if you'd like to get involved with the work of the Impact Facility, do let us know. Thank you very much.